So let's talk a bit about defamation in Section 230, because you're a lawyer, right?
That's a terrible segue, Tim.
That's actually pretty good. We're talking about big tech.
Show
we're
me
talking
what.
about,
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
well, we're talking about censorship. You've got conservatives getting banned left and right. Q gets purged. But the Rachel Maddow conspiracy nuts are given free pass, right?
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question, because I can't remember who I was talking to. I think I was talking to Will Chamberlain about this. And we've brought up several times. For those that aren't familiar, Section 230 basically gives broad immunities to web. What's the phrase they use? Interactive web companies or
Internet service providers.
There you go. That basically means everybody for any reason. Okay. So what happens is they can ban whoever they want, regardless of speech, because they are immunized from defamation, as well as, long story short, they won't have the immunity taken from them if they do moderate. However, what's been happening is, very obviously, most of the bans happen on the right or anti-establishment. Some of the bans happen on the left, but it's usually like anti-war, anti-establishment leftist types. Now, the problem is many people on the right seem to think there's a distinction between a publisher and a platform, as if it matters. It really doesn't. The New York Times has the same protections as Twitter, but something interesting does arise out of this argument that I want to present to you. First, I'll start with the New York Times, for instance, right? If somebody writes an article, and the New York Times publishes it on its front page, what's the distinction between that and, say, someone writing a tweet and Twitter publishing it and putting it in its what's happening bar to everybody in the world?
Oh, putting it in the what's happening bar.
Right.
That's a much harder question, because if you would have just you should have asked two questions. The first question was, what's the difference between the Times publishing an article and a tweet? That's dumb, though, right? Obvious question.
Well, right, and that's why
Twitter is just mechanically. So I don't know how they choose articles for the what's happening bar.
They editorialize.
Oh.
They select a tweet and then they write about it. Or tweets.
Okay. So if they select a tweet based on algorithms, the selection piece of it might be content neutral in and of itself, although their algorithms are not content neutral at all. But if they editorialize, see, again, we have to ask ourselves, what's the inquiry here? Why do we care about this distinction? The simple answer to your question is there's no difference. They are now publishers. They are now putting content into the world for which they have the same responsibility as the New York Times.
So if John Smith writes an article and the New York Times says, we're going to put that on the front page, the New York Times is responsible for the content in terms of defamation, slander, whatever, libel. Right? Okay. If someone writes a tweet and then Twitter says, we're going to put this in our Moments tab so everybody can see it. I'm curious as to what's the difference.
Well, but what's the editorial? Okay, so you said they editorialize. It's a really...
Well, let's. I want to make sure I clarify this. So the what's happening, they'll put an editorialization, but that's usually in reference to a series of tweets. So I understand they're liable for what they write there. But if I write an article for the New York Times and then hand it to a guy and he goes, I will publish this on the front page.
Right.
The New York Times assumes responsibility for the contents of that post. If someone tweets and Twitter goes, I am going to put this in the Moments tab so that anyone who clicks it will see it front and center to hundreds of millions of people. What's the difference?
It depends on what the reasonable viewer understands from that tweet. And that's a fact question that has never been examined in a litigation setting, because cases don't go this far.
And they need to, because I got another question for you.
Especially if I'm handling them, because I would love to ask those questions.
Let me ask you a question. If Ian wrote an article and posted it on his blog, and then I took the contents of that article and put it on the front page of my website, would I assume responsibility for publishing it?
Are you more than an aggregator? Are you Drudge Report, or are you this is Tim Pool and these are the articles that I want you to read? Because
it appears on my front page identically to every other article, every other.
So that's your newspaper. In other words, he licensed the article to you to publish it in your newspaper.
So if on your Twitter account there's a retweet from Ian that appears identically to your other posts, would your retweet then be your responsibility as well?
Yes.
See, this is where there's a lot of questions that have never been asked, and we haven't seen people actually go to court and start challenging them.
But this is one of the least important questions. See, and this, as you understand, because you've spoken to Will about this, and this is like a favorite Ron and Will thing. We wrote articles on this together. It hardly matters, as the publisher versus platform distinction is mostly irrelevant because it has to do with to what extent is Twitter responsible for what people tweet. Meaning, if I defame you in a tweet, can you sue Twitter? Why would you want to sue Twitter? Because Coleman doesn't have any money.
Well, Coleman's not making it happen. Twitter is the one giving it reach and servers.
I write a tweet that says, Nancy Pelosi is an alcoholic. I have it on good authority. Nancy Pelosi is an alcoholic. Drinks a fifth of gin every half an hour. Okay? I put it on Twitter. You can't sue Twitter no matter how obvious of a lie it is. Because they're just a mechanism. They're just an internet service provider. You can sue Coleman. But I want to sue Twitter because they've got billions of dollars. And Coleman has half a house in New Jersey. Okay? And if Pelosi could prove damages, by the time she gets past my mortgage, it's not going to be worth the trouble. That's why we care. But we hardly care because Section 230 says it's not going to happen. But defamation is hardly ever the issue. The issue is the censorship. And that's where the cases are getting interesting, especially now that we have the Rogan O'Handley case that we filed last week.
What is this one? Rogan
O'Handley, known as DC Drano, sued Twitter, but Twitter is the last party in the defendant column. The first party is the Secretary of State of the state of California. Rogan got documents from Judicial Watch, smoking gun documents showing that under the guise of election security, the state of California was sending, and through a consultant, and in cooperation with 22 members of the National Association of Secretaries of State, all Democrats, sending tweets that were selected, I think, by the consultant, to Twitter, saying, this is misleading. This is fake news.
A direct line from Democrats to the big tech company.
No, they are all Democrats. A direct line from the government.
There you go.
To the censorship. All we've heard about is, you build your own Twitter. The government and Twitter are the same. The government, there's been lots of talk about what kinds of accommodations have been made. We won't regulate you if you play ball. All this, that's all very sort of impressionistic. What we have here is specific political instructions from political activists telling Twitter, and they banned, DC Drano has 2 million Instagram followers.
Right.
Meaning, they just needed an excuse. He's too influential to be allowed to continue to comment on Twitter. Now, as far as I know, Instagram's not implicated in this, in Facebook, in this particular issue. But this is where things are going. So now that's almost the first. That's a new world. That's a new world. And this is a case that we filed on Thursday. And it's being routinely ignored by the media. Completely ignored. If I told you, Fox won't cover it.
They won't?
Fox will not cover it.
Wow.
And
I always knew that Tucker Carlson was controlled opposition.
So Rogan and Harmeet, my partner, were on Tucker Thursday night, but Fox News won't cover it.
But Tucker allowed you to talk about it.
Tucker,
I take it back. He's the only one who's not controlled opposition.
Tucker, these categories are both baloney. They and it's very common on Twitter that people want to, he's a rhino. That bill, Democrats support it. The world is not black and white. And there's no question that in politics you have to make accommodations to get things done with people from other parties. And we all have to get that. People are complicated, and they have, and like we were talking before we went on, who's sticking their neck out for the movement versus who's sticking his neck out for his 401k, and listen, most people are just interested in, I don't want to call it a grift, making a living, making a living.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.